Okay, to make an acrylic Imprimatura, we just need acrylic paint. And traditionally, semi-neutral kind of earth tones were used a lot for the underpainting because it's a good average for anything else you want to paint, like skin or architecture or landscape. It works as a really good general base for everything else. In the Fuchs tradition, it's quite common to use like a highly chromatic red. He did some experiments with cadmium red and Venetian red, but also under many of his works you see something that looks like a caput mortuum or a Mars violet. So we're going to mix a little bit of that. Why not do the whole thing with oil? Well, in most cases your acrylic, your canvas is already covered with an acrylic primer anyway. So if we're talking about being purists, then fair enough. If you're starting with oil primed linen, then you can't use acrylic on top of oil. So you would do your Imprimatura with oil paint on top of the oil primed linen. But in this case, most cheap canvases, cotton canvases, are covered with acrylic primer. So there's no harm just speeding up and expediting the process by using acrylic Imprimatura. And in fact, it dries really fast and it's quite a strong, flexible paint film. So it's not a bad idea. So yeah, we're going to mix a little bit of this Mars Violet into here, and I'll just show kind of how simple it is to do. Now, if you have an inked-in cartoon, you want to test the strength of the paint on the lines before you do the whole lot, because obviously you don't want to lose your drawing. So that's where testing is really important. So you can see I'm just going from one side to the other, one side to the other. Notice I'm not kind of going working one area, taking it all the way across. Also, I'm not stopping halfway, because then you end up with a kind of chop line of the brush, like that, like that. You don't want to do that, so you can just take it all the way across. Now, the more transparent the pigment that you use, like say you use something more like an ultramarine blue, you're going to get more streaks because it's more transparent, whereas the Mars pigments are quite opaque, quite thick, so they flatten out, they level out quite well. So I can just do a bit of cross brushing to smooth, to kind of break up the strokes that have all been going in one direction. So I'm doing that, so I'm just getting the paint into another level of the weave of the canvas. And then I can go this way also. And I'm using quite a light touch with the brush. I'm not pressing down the brush. It's almost like I'm allowing the brush's own weight to just glide on top of the paint. So you can go the other way, but you have to be connected to what's happening with the acrylic, because if the acrylic is beginning to dry out, it's actually kind of counterproductive to fiddle around with it for too long, because you can start getting lift off, which is where the brush is actually lifting off the paint rather than moving it around, and that would lead to patches or holes in the evenness of the Imprimatura. That's not a disaster though. Like, having a bit of texture or streaks or brushwork on the level of the Imprimatura actually can bring the painting to life and give it more dynamism or create unexpected things to happen later on. So don't panic if it's not completely flat and even. So there is the Imprimatura. You can see there is some streaks. So what I'll do is I'll give this acrylic like 15 minutes to set, and then I'll give it a second coat just to get it perfectly even. That shouldn't necessarily be your main objective though. And the other thing is, remember, you really want to keep hold of your cartoon. Don't put it on too thick so that you lose all of your beautiful, careful cartoon work, because then it's counterproductive. As for what is the best brush for the job, I like a soft varnish brush. This one is by Art Spectrum, but there are many different brands, and you can see on profile that it's not a fat brush. It's just quite thin, and it holds quite a nice flat stroke. Okay, so we're going to come back to this in 15 minutes and take a look at how it is and see if it needs another coat. All right, everybody, we're just going in for round 2. But as you can see, it's dried, it's settled down, and you can see there's some streaks going on, but to be honest, it's quite subtle. So I'm just going to give it another round. And it's just the same kind of brushwork. You know, I'm going to go systematically all the way across like this. Now remember, if your acrylic is too viscous and it's kind of dragging, you just want like a tiny splash of water just to thin it out so it moves easier. Too much water though, and the Imprimatura will become kind of weak or transparent. So it's just a bit of a balancing act. It's always good to test things and have strips of canvas around that you can just test things on when you're learning. You should test new materials and their compatibility with each other. You know, and this is actually a really important thing to point out here is before you do your Imprimatura on top of your cartoon, if you have one, you've got to test the paint on top of that ink. So you have a strip of spare canvas, you draw some of your Indian ink, you let it dry, then see if that India ink withstands the acrylic on top. You know, you want to make sure the India ink doesn't dissolve, and you want to make sure that you can still see the India ink as well. It's a hard-won experience from doing so many workshops and looking after people's processes, and I've had to make sure I really understand the compatibility of my materials for everyone so I don't ruin their work along the way. But it put me in kind of good habits of just testing things out for my own work whenever I'm using a new material. Okay. So it's a lot more flat now. You should wash your brushes immediately after using acrylic, otherwise, you let that dry and a brand new brush can be written off.